All right. Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to the C Show. I'm here with author and historian Dan Korn tonight, and we're here to talk about some historical figures. And I think he's got an interesting one for us that most of us have not heard about. How are you tonight, Dan?
I'm doing well. Yourself?
Man, I can't complain. Just trying to beat this heat, and otherwise, I'm good. So, what do you got for us tonight? I'm excited to hear about this.
Well, let's talk about Mary Edwards Walker. Mary Edwards Walker is a very interesting character. Most people just simply refer to her as Dr. Mary Walker. She was an American abolitionist. She was a prohibitionist. She was a prisoner of war, and she was a surgeon. And she is the only woman in American history to ever receive the Medal of Honor. And
Wow.
all of this is quite fascinating, in my opinion.
Well,
She
is she
is
just a surgeon too? Because that's pretty fascinating right there.
she was the first true. There were other women that were involved as well, but she is the first true combat surgeon that was a female. Um,
Wow.
this was a very interesting young woman. Her family was quite unusual for the times. I mean, she was born in 1832 in what was at the time farming community of Oswego, New York. Which is hard on the edge of the shore of Lake Ontario. It's definitely snowbelt country, if you're familiar with that area at all. And her parents were farmers. Her dad Alva, her mother Vesta. She was the youngest of 7 children. She had 5 sisters, 1 brother. But the kids were raised in a very progressive manner that was somewhat, well, I won't say somewhat, it was definitely revolutionary for the time. Their parents did not believe in traditional ways of raising, as far as, the boys are going to do this, the girls are going to do that, and that's the way it is. No, they didn't do that. They raised their children, particularly Mary, with a strong sense of independence and the fact that they could do anything that they wanted to, and also a sense of justice. This is something that she demonstrated throughout her life. They were Christians, but they were also free thinkers in the sense that they raised the kids to question regulations and restrictions of the various denominations. Now, on top of that, the parents themselves demonstrated non-traditional gender roles by the fact that they shared the farm work around the house and around the property. I mean, the mom went out and actually worked the fields, heavy labor, doing things of that nature, while dad, believe it or not, actually took part in doing general household chores like doing laundry and things of that nature. So the children were definitely exposed to a very non-traditional way of life. Now, this is a girl who she didn't wear a women's clothing during farm labor because she considered it too restricting. She wore what the boys wore. And her mom firmly believed this and reinforced it. She told her, fact out, no corsets because corsets were unhealthy and tight lacings were unhealthy. So none of the girls wore any of that kind of stuff, which is kind of interesting in her case because Mary was actually very pretty, very attractive girl for her time period and everything. And she didn't wear any of the type of stuff that you normally saw women bundled up into. And still, men found her quite attractive without all of that. Her elementary school education was actually, again, a little bit out of the norm. The parents had started a local school. The daughters were as educated as their son was. And so the mom and dad actually set up a primary school. It was the first free schoolhouse in Oswego, late 1830s. And then she, after finishing primary school, she and 2 of her sisters attended a local seminary in what's Fulton, New York, which is about maybe an hour's drive or so away today, as far as that's concerned. If you're familiar with New York State and I-90 and the free what's called the thruway, definitely not the freeway. Now, it was an institution of higher learning. But one of the things it did also is that it emphasized for the times modern social reform and gender roles, education, and hygiene. So its practices, its ideologies helped cement Mary's determination to defy traditional standards, of femininity and on a principle of injustice. Why can't the girls be treated the same way as the boys, kind of thing. So in her free time, on top of that, she would pore over her father's medical texts. Dad was a doctor as well as a farmer, and she loved to study anatomy and physiology. And this sparked an interest in her to become a doctor. Now, prior to that, she was a schoolmarm, which was not uncommon, obviously, in that time period. But what she was doing was earning enough money to be able to pay her way through what was then Syracuse Medical College, which today is Syracuse University. And she went, and at the time, I don't think they realized it was a girl until she showed up, and she had
I'm sorry to cut you off. Was it okay for a woman to be a surgeon back then, or what was the?
In fact, Elizabeth Blackwell, who was the first female doctor, recognized as the first female doctor, her and Emma Willard, Elizabeth Blackwell literally had to leave this country in order to practice that stuff. She went to England and there. So it was difficult to get in to start with. You have very chauvinistic views of what a woman's role was. And if you know anything about that period of time, that's the Victorian era.
Yes.
And women were definitely, not socially active as far as that was concerned, or involved in fields of work that were, non-traditional as far as women were concerned. But she eventually did this. She graduated with honors from the school in about 1855, and then she was the only woman in her class, obviously. She had fallen in love, by the way, while she was in school with another student. His name was Albert Miller, and hence they were married shortly before she turned 23. It was about 1855. But here's the thing, and this should have told people right away, this girl is going to be different. Because when she got married, she did not wear the traditional type wedding dress. No, she wore a short skirt with, trousers, or what they called bloomers back then, underneath, clearly visible. So, and when they did the marriage vows, the word obey was not in the vows. She refused to allow them to be used. The word obey in her vows.
She was a very independent woman then.
Yes. She retained her last name, which again was unheard of at that time period.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yes. She did not go by Mary Miller. She went by Mary Walker.
And that's not even really a big deal. I mean, that's not even really a major thing today. I mean, yeah, some people do it, but not on the whole.
Yeah, I taught for many years with a teacher who was married, but she went, in fact, two of them, they both went by their maiden names. From, I don't know if they still are or not, but they were at the time. They set up a joint practice when the two of them, as they graduated together, in Rome, New York, which is canal towns. These are all canal towns, and Rome, of course, was during the 1950s and 60s and something, was a sack base. But back then it was a farming community, a canal community, and the practice simply did not flourish. Now, she was the better doctor of the two, but female physicians just were not generally trusted or respected at that time. If you remember, there was a TV series about that particular time called Dr. Quinn, Medicine Woman. And I'm trying to remember the name of the actress who played in that. Oh, Jane Seymour. And she had a hard time getting men to trust her, although that TV series ran a long time, because women just weren't seen as doing these kinds of things. And in truth, medicine at that time was still somewhat barbaric. Male doctors were very restricted as far as how they could actually examine a female, particularly the female's feminine parts and anatomy.
Really?
Yes. And so they actually were not actually allowed to touch per se the woman's female parts with their bare hands and stuff. So they had to be very careful about all of this. They had to wear gloves or do it through a like a almost a curtain kind of thing. And this is one of the reasons why there were so many problems with women in terms of their physical issues, particularly with childbearing. So a lot to do with that.
Even in childbearing, they were not allowed to.
Well, childbearing, of course, was extremely. She did not have any children. She never had any children. But whether or not that was we chose not to, which I tend to think is the reason for it, or there was a physical reason, no one seems to know for sure. I personally think it was just simply she did not want to do it. She did not want to have kids. They later on divorced. Many years later, they separated relatively early, but they never got a divorce until much later. She just didn't want to do it, but he was, and he quite frankly cheated on her because he got fed up with her and some of her attitudes and some things she did. So they finally were able to obtain a divorce on the account of his infidelity. But even that back then was different. It's not like it is today at all. It took a lot to get a divorce back then. She went to what was then called Bowen College Institute, now at Lenox College in Iowa for a while, and she was suspended because she refused to resign from the school's debating society, which she had joined, and it had been all male prior to her. And she refused to resign, the school kicked her out. So, but she was different. Again, like I said, her parents, the wardrobe choices. One time she did not follow the norm. She believed firmly that a lot of the problems that women had were psychologically associated with physical, moral, and mental issues because of their unhygienic manner of dressing. And quite frankly, they were so bundled up back then, they had to be very uncomfortable. So she was totally against the idea of these long skirts with all the petticoats, because if she felt, not only was it uncomfortable, but you had an issue with a collection of dust and dirt and God knows what else was inside those skirts. So this is when she began to experiment with different types of clothing. And by the time of the Civil War, her typical ensemble included trousers with suspenders under a knee-length dress with a tight waist and a full skirt. That's what she wore. And she was accepted in that way. Now, growing up, she got in a lot of trouble. When she was a school teacher, one time she was assaulted on the way home by a neighboring farmer and a group of boys. They chased her and they attacked her with eggs and other things, rotten tomatoes, that kind of stuff. Some of the female colleagues she worked with criticized her choices. First of all, they didn't like the fact that she was trying to become a doctor, a nurse. And patients, of course, would often gawk at her and tease her too, because this just was not the norm. But she consistently worked at persisting in her mission to inform and reform women's dress. She always felt that women's clothing should protect the person, but allow freedom of motion and circulation, and just the wearer should not be a slave to it. Okay, so she was very strong, and as far as that was concerned, in that and abolitionism. She wrote for a number of different women's journals about her campaigns regarding women's fashion. And again, the reasons for it: injuries to health, expense, the contribution to the dissolution of marriages, all of that. But her literature was spread quite a bit. And it made her a very popular figure among other feminists and eventually other female physicians. She and Elizabeth Blackwell, for example. But she was a very, very interesting person. She was arrested in 1870 in New Orleans because she was being mocked by men because she was dressed as a man. The officer who arrested her actually arm behind her and asked her if she'd ever had sex with a man. And we don't know what she said, but we do know she was released from custody as soon as she was recognized at the police court. So he probably thought she was a prostitute or something like that. Who knows?
Okay.
Okay, so when it comes to the Civil War, this is where she, of course, makes her reputation. She volunteered at the outbreak as a surgeon, first to the Army, who rejected her, even though she'd had a private practice for many years. She was offered the job of a nurse. She declined it, chose to volunteer as a surgeon for the Union Army as a civilian. Of course, the U.S. Army didn't have any female surgeons, so as a result, she was only allowed to practice only as a nurse. And she was at the First Battle of Bull Run as a nurse. She worked out of the Patent Office Hospital in Washington, D.C. She was actually working as an unpaid field surgeon for a while. She was at Fredericksburg. And Chattanooga, Battle of Chickamauga is when things finally began to happen for her. Now, this was a woman who, as a suffragist, she was probably very, very happy to see women serving as soldiers. And in fact, she brought to the press the stories of various women who were serving as soldiers, as disguised as men, one being this Frances Pope. But officially, she is the first female surgeon of the Union Army. And she wore men's clothing during her work because she claimed it was easier for the demands of her work. And you can thank George Henry Thomas for most of this.
Wow.
Yes, she had met him. She had met Sherman, and she had met him. And he had told her, this is Thomas, he had told her if she could get additional training and prove that she had received additional training, certification and everything, that he would see to it that she would get some sort of an appointment as far as working as a surgeon. And she did, and she went to him, handed him the document and said, here it is. I've got it. I've got the proof and everything. Of course, she was also very pretty too. So, and the guys like that. So Thomas being the kind of guy he was, she's employed by them as a contract acting assistant surgeon / civilian, okay, by the Army of the Cumberland. So she is employed by them, and she will later be appointed the assistant surgeon of the 52nd Ohio. Now, she's at Chickamauga. She saw a lot at Chickamauga. A couple of things that they did with her. They roomed her with a nurse, and the two of them shared a tent together. They had a guard that actually watched the tent whenever they were in it to make sure that nobody bothered them. She also carried a 6-gun. She was a very adept at firearms. Her father had seen to it that all of his daughters all knew how to use a gun. And Mary was an excellent shot.
Wow.
So, and they knew that she carried that pistol in her clothing. So no one messed with this woman. You know, she could have put a bullet in you without any problem at all. And
tough girl.
Yeah, she was toughy. Now, during her service, she frequently crossed battle lines. She treated civilians. In fact, that is exactly what happens to her in April of 1864. She's captured by Confederate troops coming back from one of these trips of hers. She's arrested as a spy. She had just finished helping a Confederate doctor perform an amputation, and she was captured. And she was actually imprisoned in Richmond at Castle Thunder, and she was there for about 6 months. Somewhere between 4 and 5 months. August 1864, when she was released as part of a prisoner exchange. They let her go. Now, while she was in prison, she refused to wear the clothes provided her. She said no. Said they were supposedly more becoming of her sex, and she flat out said, "No, I'm not going to do it. I'm going to wear what I've got. I'm going to stay in the same kind of clothing that I've been wearing." And Confederates just said, "Okay, fine, go for it." And eventually, she is exchanged for another Confederate surgeon from Tennessee. Now, she will go on from that point and become the supervisor of a female prison in Kentucky, Louisville, if I remember correctly, and also the head of an orphanage. So she served in many different capacities during this time period of the war. Now, she gets the Medal of Honor in part because of the fact that after the war, she sought a brevet commission to validate her service. And Andrew Johnson, who was president by this point, directed the Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, to study the legalities of all of this. Can we do this? He went and got an opinion from the Army's Judge Advocate General, that Holt, and who had determined that there was no precedent for commissioning a female, but that a commendatory acknowledgement could be issued in place of that commission. This gave Johnson the opportunity, kind of PR kind of thing, to personally award her the Medal of Honor as an alternative. Now, she was not formally recommended for it, but that was not uncommon back then either. So this was something that was new. It's not until like 45, 50 years later, Congress created this Pension Act for Medal of Honor recipients, and they set up separate Army and Navy Medal of Honor rolls. And the idea was that the Army was directed to review the eligibility for these prior recipients to see whether or not, there were ones in there that shouldn't have gotten awards, and so on and so forth. Now, this is where about 900 of these things got recalled, so to speak. And I mean, people like Buffalo Bill Cody, for example, who had received, was removed from the rolls. Okay, I don't know whether or not he actually returned it or not, but he supposedly had his medal recalled, as did Mary Walker. And she was not considered to be eligible because in 1862, 63, and 1904, the law strictly required recipients to be officers or enlisted members. And of course, in her case, she was classified as a civilian contract surgeon and was not a commissioned officer. So they attempted to do this. Now, here's where things were wrong about this. There were two other contract surgeons who were also civilians, males, who also had received the medal. They were not turned off. They were not recalled as far as their medals were concerned. So they were just as equally ineligible, but they didn't do that with them. They only did it with her. Now, when they showed up, okay, now, and one of these people was Leonard Wood. One of the other two was Leonard Wood, the guy had been, chief of staff of the Army. He had been a civilian contractor with the same status as Walker when he was recommended for the award, and he got it. Okay, Fort Leonard Wood, he's big name. Now, twice, this Medal of Honor board recommended Wood's medal. They knew he was ineligible by these rulings, but yet they still went ahead and did it. When they went to her house to get her medal back, because she refused to answer the mail and so on and so forth, they were met at the door by her carrying a shotgun with the Medal of Honor pinned on her. She made it very clear to them that the only way they were going to get it was over her dead body. And she was going to take a few of them with her. So they backed off.
Tough old gal there.
All right. And after the war, she was awarded a disability pension. Partial muscular atrophy, because of being imprisoned by the enemy, she was unable to do a lot of things. She got a whole $8.50 a month. That started with in 1865. By 1899, they had raised it to $20 a month, which back then was decent money. Okay. She will become a writer and a lecturer. She cut her hair. Her hair used to be quite long. She cut it relatively short, and affected a man's style haircut from that point on.
Dan, let me ask you, sorry to cut you off. Do you think she may have been a lesbian?
No, there's nothing to indicate that whatsoever, that she preferred women to men. The nurse that shared a tent with her never wrote anything about her that would lead us to believe that at all. She liked men. There was no doubt of that. She was quite the flirt, from what we understand. You know, and she was pretty. So, but that's just the way she was. And who knows what would have happened if she had not quite, followed that kind of thing. But she wasn't. In fact, she used to, she, when people would criticize her attire, she would tell them, I don't wear men's clothes. I wear my own clothes, like that. And that was just the way she was. And she wrote 2 books that discussed this very subject of women's rights in dress.
So she was just a female activist way before it really started becoming.
Well, people don't realize that I've always said that Abigail Adams was our nation's first true feminist.
Really?
Because she stood up for the women's rights. I mean, she wrote John the letter, the infamous letter, and what she said to him, don't forget the women, when they were talking about the Declaration of Independence and all that other stuff and so on and so forth, constitutions. And she certainly made decisions on her own that she had to do because her husband was not around, and things that back then others would have said, oh my God, what are you doing, kind of thing. But Mary Walker was no different than that thing. Okay. She really was a feminist in that sense, but the masculine clothing, it got in the way. She was accepted in England far more receptively than she was here in the United States. And she also wrote an article regarding what she called the crowning constitutional argument, in which she argued that the states as well as the feds had already given women the right to vote. And they just hadn't bothered to enforce it. And she was constantly testifying to House subcommittees regarding these kinds of things, 1912, 1914. She's up in front of these guys talking to them, saying, hey, you need to do this, you need to do that. And she based a lot of her arguments on what was going on out west, because obviously women got the right to vote out west much, much, much faster than they did nationwide. And that was basically because they realized that a woman could do the same work as a man, and they needed to be treated equally. Well, she had proven that point herself by being a surgeon and dealing with some absolutely horrific stuff that women were supposed to be able to see and everything like that. This wasn't a girl who fainted at the sight of blood or anything else, for that matter. So she was tough. She was tough. We're not sure what it was she caught. She was sick for quite a long time in her late years. She passed at the age of 86. She was at home in Oswego at that point, and she is now buried in Oswego, a little rural cemetery, very plain funeral. But here's the thing that was different about her. When she was buried, yes, the American flag draped over her casket, but she's wearing a suit, a men's black suit inside the coffin, not a dress. Okay, not a dress. And on her breast is pinned that Medal of Honor. So she has it on her in the casket, in the grave. Okay, it's there. And there's various and sundry, statues and monuments to her and so forth. But she died a year before the 19th Amendment was passed, which of course gave women the right to vote. But she had strenuously campaigned for that to occur, and she was very well known in Oswego as a woman of who helped with others and did things for others and treated people with a great deal of compassion. So good lady. She was inducted into the National Women's Hall of Fame in 2000 and is there now. And there's been a number of things about her. There was during World War II, they had a Liberty ship named after her, the SS Mary Walker. The U.S. Postal Service issued a stamp in her honor in '82. The medical facilities at SUNY Oswego, which is the State University of New York, are named after her. the Mary Walker Health Center, and there's a plaque to that effect. There's an Army Reserve Center named for her in Michigan. The Whitman Walker Clinic in Washington, D.C. is named in honor of her and the poet Walt Whitman, who was a nurse during the Civil War. And there's a number of other places as well. I've seen the statue of her in Oswego. The thing weighs like half a ton. It's bronze. It's very, very, it looks good. It's a nice statue. And it does a good job of honoring her. She was also included in, Hillary and Chelsea Clinton's book about the book of gutsy women, favorite stories of courage and resilience. She is in that story. She's in that book, her story. And she was just good people. And just because she was different in her approach to life and everything, that of course helped make her very controversial. When she showed up in Washington, D.C. for one of her things, she came walking in and she's wearing the black suit. She's got the cape on. She's wearing a black top hat. And they're all looking at her like, what? Like that. Here she is sitting at the table, taking off the hat and, the cape and everything and sitting down, just like, a guy would, just standing there and waiting to be questioned and answer her questions and stuff. But she was tough. She was tough.
This is an amazing story. I've enjoyed this one.
Yep. I find her, I featured her fairly prominently in my second book, Tennessee Thunder, simply because of the fact that the way she became a surgeon. Now her position, the pay she was receiving also was the equivalent of what a lieutenant or a captain would have received during the war. So,
oh wow,
yeah. So even though they were not giving her rank, so to speak, she was getting paid, and the soldiers who were involved with her had tremendous respect for her, and the fact that she never asked of them anything that more than any other man would ask of them, a male surgeon would ask of them. And as a result of that, they tended to treat her with extra kindness just because she was kind to them. She wasn't gruff. She wasn't drunk like a lot of them. Anything about doctors during the American Civil War. A lot of those guys were heavy drinkers, partly because of what they saw. She was not. She was not. And they liked that about her, the fact that she didn't do that. And she kept herself, as possible as it. She was as feminine as she could be within the confines of her own personality. And the men appreciated that about her. So, good person. Good person.
Great story. Is there anything else you want to add to that one?
No, I think we pretty much got her. Oh, in 1977, Jimmy Carter looked at everything and said, nuts to what the military says. He restored the honor in her name completely. Her family her descendants had pushed for this, but he gave her back the full honors of the Medal of Honor. So, who was the other person at that time? Oh, Robert E. Lee was given back his citizenship at the same time. Mary Walker got full recognition for her Medal of Honor. And to this day, she is still the only one to ever win Medal of Honor.
That's amazing.
So, it really is. But that's just the way it is. But she was, you look at pictures of her in the way she was dressed, and when she's young, you could tell this was an attractive person. And then when she got older, that's a different story. But she lived a long time too, and she took care of business. She took care of business. I like her.
What you told me, I like this story too. I mean, these stories like here really needs to be told to have an appreciation of history in the American Civil War. We all hear about Lee and Grant and Forrest, but we never hear these kind of stories.
So,
Well, all right, Dan, I appreciate that, man. And we're going to have you on soon again, buddy.
Be happy to do it.
Great.
Take care.
Oh.